The sun hung low in the sky, casting a fiery glow over the vast mansion's stone driveway. Inside, I could hear the faint echo of voices, whispers of excitement, but also a darker undercurrent, a sense of impending doom that seemed to hover just beneath the surface. It wasn't just the usual bustle of my sister-in-law's elaborate gatherings. This time, something felt different. Something had changed. I'd been hearing rumors for weeks now, murmurs in the background, stories that seemed too outlandish to be true. But the moment I stepped into the grand foyer of the house, it became painfully clear. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel it in my bones. My heart raced as I made my way into the living room, where my sister-in-law, Caroline, stood with her arms crossed, her sharp eyes glinting with an all-too-familiar sense of satisfaction. I knew immediately that something was off, something wasn't right. "You came just in time," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "I have something to tell you." I wanted to respond, but my breath caught in my throat. The words she spoke next were like a slap to my face. "I've sent the kids to boarding school," she declared. My mind reeled. My children, the ones I'd raised, nurtured, and loved, had been sent away without so much as a word to me. But the shock wasn't the worst part. No, it was the way Caroline said it, as if she had some higher authority, some power that allowed her to make decisions for me, for my family. And what truly gnawed at me was the quiet, smug look on her face, as though she believed she had won. But she had no idea who was behind that very school, the one she believed would break me. As the realization hit me, a slow smile crept onto my face. "You did what?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "And do you know who owns that school, Caroline?" She raised an eyebrow. "I don't really care who owns it. It's for their own good." "Actually," I said, leaning in closer, "I think you might want to reconsider." The words felt heavy in my mouth, but I couldn't hold them back now. Because the person behind that boarding school is someone you're going to want to be on the right side of. For the first time, her smirk faltered, but she quickly masked it with an unconvincing laugh. "Please, if this is some sort of joke." "It's no joke," I interrupted, my voice firm, unyielding. "You're about to learn something that will change everything." This was the beginning of a battle I didn't expect. But I wasn't going to be the victim here. This was far from over. The phone call had come late the night before, just as I was settling into the quiet of my living room after a long day of juggling the chaos that came with raising two young kids and trying to keep the household running smoothly. The voice on the other end was my older brother, Matt. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. "You need to talk to Caroline," he said, his tone unusually serious. "I don't know what's going on, but something doesn't feel right. She's making decisions without consulting anyone. She's even taken the kids to that private boarding school." I had always tried to keep my distance from the drama that seemed to follow Caroline around. She was my sister-in-law, and though we'd once shared a connection, an unspoken understanding of family over the years, that bond had become strained. She had always been the type of person who believed she knew better, always had a plan for everything, and never hesitated to implement it, regardless of how it affected anyone else. But this was a line I couldn't let her cross. I spent the next few hours tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling of betrayal. It wasn't just that she had sent my kids away without even a conversation, it was the blatant disregard for my role as their mother. She had been my sister-in-law, someone I trusted. Now, she was someone I barely recognized. How could she not have consulted me? We were family. I couldn't just let it go. Not without understanding why she'd done it. Not without confronting her. The next morning, I showed up at her doorstep, my mind already racing through 1,000 different scenarios. I wasn't sure what I expected: anger, explanation, apology, but I wasn't prepared for the smug indifference that met me when I walked into her sprawling mansion. The luxury of the place seemed to mock me, each marble column and crystal chandelier whispering the truth that Caroline had always lived in a world so far removed from mine that she thought she could control everything. "Can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but my emotions were beginning to boil over. "Why did you do this? Why send my kids away without asking me?" She didn't even flinch. "They needed a better education, and I thought." I didn't ask for your help. I cut her off, my frustration beginning to seep through. I can raise my own kids without interference. Caroline's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in this conversation, I could see the real woman behind her perfectly polished facade. She was angry, but not because of what I had just said. It was the challenge to her control that angered her. I didn't ask you for permission, she retorted coolly. You're welcome, by the way. The school is top-notch, and they'll have opportunities you could never give them here. I'm helping them. Her words stung, each one designed to diminish me, to make me feel small. But there was a hint of something darker behind her words, something I couldn't quite place. It was as if she wasn't just trying to justify her actions, she was trying to prove something to me. But what? My brother Matt, who had been mostly uninvolved over the years, suddenly seemed more involved than ever, and it felt like he was avoiding eye contact with me whenever we spoke about Caroline. It was as though he was hiding something, but I couldn't tell what. Still, the core of the issue was clear. Caroline had overstepped her bounds, and I was standing on the precipice of a battle I hadn't anticipated. The anger inside me wasn't just because of what she'd done, it was that she had underestimated me. She thought I wouldn't fight back, that I'd just accept her decision. But what she didn't know was that there was far more at play here than she realized. I had a card I hadn't yet played. As I left her house that morning, the realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. I couldn't just confront her about the kids. That would be too easy. I had to dig deeper. There was something off about the situation, and I was going to get to the bottom of it. I needed answers, not just from Caroline, but from the people around her. I would go to any lengths to protect my kids, but I also needed to understand why she had done this. And then there was the issue of my brother. Matt had always been there for me, but I could sense the distance growing between us. Was he on Caroline's side? Or was he in the dark about her actions too? I couldn't tell. The uncertainty gnawed at me, and I had to figure it out before it unraveled everything. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something that could change everything. Maybe Caroline wasn't just playing a game, maybe she was playing for keeps. And if that was the case, I needed to make sure I was ready to win. But how could I, when so many of the people I trusted were already playing for the other team? The days following my confrontation with Caroline were filled with a quiet tension, each one heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something much bigger than a mere family disagreement. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Caroline wasn't just meddling in my life, she was playing a dangerous game, one that could ruin everything I had worked for. And yet, my mind kept coming back to that one question. Why? Why had she sent the kids away? What was she trying to prove? It didn't make sense. Caroline was always the perfectionist, always trying to control everything, but this felt like something deeper. Something personal. That night, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows on the walls. The house was too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. I reached for my phone and dialed Matt's number, hoping to break the silence, maybe even get a glimpse into his mind. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hey," he answered, his voice flat. "Hey, Matt," I replied, my voice tight. "We need to talk." There was a long pause. "About what?" "About Caroline," I said, my words coming out more sharply than I intended. "About what she did. You're not just going to sit back and let her do this, are you?" "I don't know what to say," Matt muttered, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice. She's been making a lot of decisions lately. But she's family, you know? She's doing what she thinks is best." "That's the problem," I shot back. "She thinks she knows what's best for everyone, including me. She can't just take my kids and send them off without even telling me." "You should have stepped in." I heard a deep sigh on the other end of the line. "I didn't know it was going to happen this way," he said quietly. "She said it was just temporary, that they'd be back in a few weeks. But I'm not sure anymore." I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but I bit my tongue. Matt wasn't the enemy here, Caroline was. "Do you know what school she sent them to?" Another long silence, and when he finally spoke, his voice was tinged with guilt. "I think she's mentioned something about it before. It's a prestigious school." I don't know much about it, but it's not cheap. Well, here's the kicker, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The person who owns that school is someone I know. And they don't have good intentions. If Caroline thinks she's getting away with this, she's got another thing coming. What do you mean? Matt's voice grew more alert, his earlier indifference shifting into curiosity. I've got a plan, I said, my voice lowering as I leaned in closer. But I need your help. We need to find out everything we can about that school and about whoever is running it. We're not going to let Caroline get away with this. Matt hesitated. I don't know, I don't think Caroline would like it if we started digging into things. She's family, and I don't want to make things worse. Matt, this isn't about her. This is about the kids. She made a huge mistake, and we need to fix it. We need to get them out of there. I could feel him wavering on the other end of the line, but finally, he sighed in defeat. Okay, I'll see what I can do. But if this goes wrong, it won't, I cut him off. We're doing the right thing. I hung up the phone with a sense of uneasy satisfaction. The plan was in motion, but I knew the hardest part was yet to come. If Caroline thought she could get away with this, she was in for a rude awakening. But even as I plotted my next move, doubts started to creep in. Was I doing the right thing? Part of me felt guilty for going behind Caroline's back, for digging into her business. She was family, after all, even if our relationship had become strained over the years. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I didn't act now, I might lose everything. I couldn't let her control my children's future. The next morning, I received an unexpected visit. It was Clara, a close friend of mine who had known both me and Caroline for years. She had always been a voice of reason, someone I could rely on when things got tough. But today, there was something different in her eyes, a concern that made my stomach churn. Can we talk? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stepped into the living room. Of course, I replied, motioning for her to sit. What's going on? She hesitated before speaking, her hands twisting in her lap. I know this is going to sound strange, but I think Caroline's got more going on than you realize. It's not just the kids. There's something off about all of it. I frowned, feeling the weight of her words settle in. What do you mean? I've seen how she's been acting lately, Clara said, her voice laced with concern. She's been meeting with some people I don't trust. She's not the same person she used to be. Who is she meeting with? I asked, my heart starting to race. I don't know their names, but I've seen them at her house. They're important people, influential people. But they're not the type of people you'd want your kids to be around. My pulse quickened. This was bigger than I had imagined. Caroline wasn't just acting out of character, she was involved in something that could destroy everything I had worked for, everything I'd fought to protect. Do you think she's in danger? I asked, fear creeping into my voice. Clara looked at me for a long moment before answering. I don't know, but I think you need to be careful. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. It's something much darker. As Clara left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could send everything tumbling down. I had no choice but to move forward, but now I had to confront something much bigger than I'd expected. Caroline wasn't just controlling my kids' lives, she was tangled up with dangerous people, and if I didn't act fast, I might not be able to save her, or them. The stakes had never been higher. The night I decided to confront Caroline again was the same night everything changed. I had spent the past few days piecing together the fragments of information I had gathered about the school, about the people Caroline was meeting with, and about the unsettling truth that she wasn't just manipulating my children's future. She was making choices that could destroy everything I loved. I knew where I needed to go. I had to find her, face her, and make her see the mess she had created. But there was one thing I hadn't accounted for. The truth behind her intentions was darker than I had imagined. I pulled into the long driveway of her mansion, the looming silhouette of the house casting an eerie shadow over the yard. The lights were on in the living room, but something about the place felt different, colder. My heart raced in my chest as I walked toward the door, every step heavier than the last. This was it, the moment of truth. I knocked once, then again. I could hear footsteps approaching from inside, then the door opened, and there she stood, Caroline, her expression unreadable, like a mask of cold indifference. But her eyes betrayed her. There was something behind them, something I couldn't quite place. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "I've already explained myself, and you're still not satisfied?" I stepped forward, refusing to back down. "No, Caroline. You haven't explained a thing. You've taken my kids away without a word to me. And now I know why. You're not just trying to give them a better life, you're using them as pawns in some twisted game." Her face darkened at my accusation. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know more than you think," I snapped, stepping closer. "I know about the people you've been meeting with. The ones who own that school. The ones who have plans for my kids, for our future." Her composure slipped for a second, the faintest twitch of a nervous glance. "You're overreacting. It's not what you think." "Is it?" I pressed. "Because I've seen the files. I know about the connections, the promises, the manipulations." I took a deep breath, the truth settling into my gut like a stone. "And I know that you don't care about what's best for them, Caroline. You care about control. About winning. And that's something I can't stand by and let you do to my children." I saw it then, a flash of anger, a crack in her perfect facade. But what came next wasn't just rage, it was fear. For the first time, she seemed vulnerable, exposed. She opened her mouth to speak, but her words caught in her throat, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "You don't understand," she muttered, her voice shaking just slightly. "They'll be better off here. It's better this way, don't you see?" I was done. I had come here for answers, but what I needed most now was resolution. Caroline's manipulations weren't just hurting me, they were poisoning my children's future. "No, Caroline," I said, the words coming out firm and final. "It's not better. You've crossed a line, and it's time for it to end. I'm taking my kids back. And you're going to stay out of this from now on." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of the decision, of the confrontation, hung thick between us. Caroline's breath hitched, and for a fleeting second, I saw the woman beneath the power-hungry facade, the one who was afraid of losing everything. But it was too late. The truth had already come to light, and the damage had been done. With one last look of silent rage, Caroline stepped aside, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "You don't know what you're doing," she whispered, almost to herself. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied, turning away. "I'm saving my kids." I walked out the door, a wave of relief washing over me, but it was mixed with the cold realization that this battle was only just beginning. The stakes had never been higher, but for the first time, I felt like I had control again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for whatever came next. I was no longer just a mother trying to keep her family intact. I was a force to be reckoned with, and no one, especially not Caroline, would stand in my way again. As the days passed after my confrontation with Caroline, the weight of what had happened began to settle in. I'd won, there was no question about that. My kids were back, safe and sound, and Caroline's hold on them had finally been broken. But the victory didn't feel as sweet as I had imagined. The path that had led me here had been paved with so much pain, so many difficult decisions, and the lingering shadow of everything I'd lost along the way. It wasn't just Caroline that I had to reckon with. I was forced to confront the parts of myself I'd neglected for too long, my own insecurities, my fears of failure, and the way I had allowed my family's dynamics to spiral out of control. It was easy to blame Caroline, easy to point the finger at her manipulations, but the truth was, I hadn't been as present as I should have been. My marriage to Matt had become a series of silent, unresolved conflicts. I had been so caught up in my own internal struggles that I had let the cracks form without realizing how deep they were growing. But even with all the chaos, there was a sense of relief in reclaiming control, in knowing that I could stand up for myself, for my children, and for the life I had worked so hard to build. It was a hard lesson, but one that I needed. I had always been someone who avoided confrontation, who let things slide to keep the peace. But now I knew, peace at the expense of everything else was no peace at all. The day I took my kids home from Caroline's mansion was one I would never forget. The house, once so imposing and cold, now felt like a distant memory. The kids were full of excitement, their faces lit up with joy as they ran around the house, finally free from the tension and the uncertainty of those past few weeks. Matt and I sat together in the living room, the air between us thick with unspoken words. He had apologized profusely after everything went down. I could see the guilt in his eyes, and I knew that deep down, he regretted not stepping in sooner. He had always wanted to keep the peace with Caroline to avoid rocking the boat. But we both knew now that peace had come at a terrible cost. "Do you think things can go back to normal?" he asked, breaking the silence. I turned to him, the weight of everything still pressing down on me. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think we've both changed. I think we need to figure out what's next. But I do know this, we have a chance to rebuild. We have a chance to make things better." He nodded, his eyes softening. "I'm ready, if you are." The conversation wasn't a sudden fix, nor was it the conclusion I had hoped for. But it was a step in the right direction. We had learned hard truths about ourselves and about each other, and now we had to find our way back to a healthier place. It wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't afraid of hard work anymore. Weeks passed, and slowly, things began to fall into place. I started seeing the changes in myself that I hadn't expected. I no longer second-guessed my decisions, no longer let my insecurities dictate my actions. There was a new sense of strength in me, quiet but firm. I was no longer just surviving, I was living, I was thriving. And I could see the difference in the kids, too. They were more confident, more at ease, knowing that they were loved and protected. And as for Caroline, I never saw her again. I don't know what happened to her, and honestly, I didn't care. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. Reflecting on it all, I realized that this journey wasn't just about reclaiming my children or defeating Caroline. It was about reclaiming myself. It had been a long time since I'd felt so in control of my own life. And the realization that I had the power to shape my future was one of the most freeing feelings I had ever experienced. I had learned that sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. That standing up for what you believe in isn't just about winning, it's about becoming the person you were always meant to be. And in that moment, surrounded by my family, I knew that this was just the beginning. The best was yet to come. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the backyard. My kids were playing in the distance, laughing, their carefree voices carrying in the air. Matt and I sat on the porch, the weight of the past few weeks slowly fading with each passing moment. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And that was enough. I leaned back, feeling the cool breeze on my skin, and allowed myself a deep breath. In that simple, quiet moment, everything felt right. The storm that had torn through our lives had passed, and in its wake, there was peace. A peace that came from knowing I had fought for what mattered most, not just my children, but my sense of self, my dignity, my strength. "Do you think things will ever be the same?" Matt asked softly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I smiled, a small, knowing smile. "No," I said, turning to him. "They'll be better." And as I watched the kids, their faces filled with hope and promise, I knew that we were building something new, something stronger. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced my fears, made the hard choices, and come out on the other side not just intact, but transformed. And no matter what came next, I knew I was ready. After all, sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that shape us into the people we were always meant to be. And I had finally become mine.